We're moms from Long Island, and we are really looking to share what we are understanding of the legislative process when it comes to these mandates that are being proposed. I have here a quote that says, "Liberty once lost is lost forever." This is John Adams' quote. That's how we feel, and I suppose that's like the theme driving this, is we don't want to let go of these liberties and then realize we want them back. And it's much harder to get it back once it's lost. To get an idea of the history of the vaccine program, we have to start in 1986, the law that was established in that year. So we have to talk about this particular protest. This is a protest about the DPT vaccine. We do not give the DPT, we call it DTP or DPT vaccine anymore. It's called DTaP. So that is a changed vaccine from this one, and that's for diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. And at this protest, a lot of parents were upset about the injuries that occurred from this particular vaccine. And there were so many injuries that the vaccine makers were going to go bankrupt. So as a result, the government had to do something to protect the drug companies from making the vaccines. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been enough money to continue the program, and they wanted to continue the program. So they made this act, which was established in 1986. It's called the National Childhood Vaccine Act, and it was passed by Congress. It was signed into law by Ronald Reagan at the time. And essentially what it did was it said U.S. citizens were no longer able to sue a vaccine manufacturer if they were injured by vaccines. It also included doctors. You couldn't do that for the doctors. So instead, the vaccine manufacturers had an excise tax that was placed on the vaccine, and the injuries, if you wanted to get compensated for them, you would go through another process called vaccine court and sue it from there. So you can't sue a vaccine company directly. And this excise tax was then, at this point, they added on to the price of the vaccine. So essentially, whoever buys the vaccine, that excise tax is included in that. Today, all vaccines for the children in the U.S. are produced by 4 companies. So these are not the same 4 companies when it started out, but eventually it evolved into being either Merck, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, or Sanofi Pasteur. And in the industry, it's the responsibility of the pharmaceutical companies to carry out their own safety testings. And to kind of go into that, when you think of a drug, a blood pressure medication, or diabetes medication, those are called drugs. And so they go through a certain process to get FDA approved. Vaccines are not called drugs. They're called biologics. And the reason why they did that was in case there was any type of warfare, let's say by Russia, to do with anthrax or whatnot, they could respond quickly without having to go through the loophole, through the whole process that would be required to get a drug to be FDA approved. So they don't call them drugs, they call them biologics as a result of that. So getting into it, knowing that now a vaccine company, one of these 4, is not liable to being sued, the government knew that there had to be additional safeguards put onto the program. Because right now we're saying, okay, so the pharmaceutical company is responsible for its own testing, but it's not liable for it, for any injuries. So what is going to be an additional safeguard we can do to make sure that they do their due diligence? Because at this point, they're all for-profit. What they established was, in 1986, to that law, they said that the Health and Human Services and the National Institute of Health work together, where the National Institute of Health would create a task force to monitor the safety protocols being established by the vaccine companies to make sure that they were improving safety procedures. The Health and Human Services would then communicate with that task force from the National Institute of Health and make reports to Congress biannually, so every 2 years. Something that was especially concerning when we looked into this was these lawsuits that happened and were concluded as of last year. So a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, that means that it's called a FOIA request, and you can bring it to the court. Any government agency can be called upon to disclose any information. It's all public information. So they, Del Bigtree's organization with Informed Consent Action Network, in partnership with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., wanted to see the status of these safety reports that were being set up to Congress. And the process to do that is to put a FOIA request, and if you don't get something back, you can take it further, and they call it a FOIA lawsuit. What was found, so there was a FOIA lawsuit with Health and Human Services, and we'll give the copy of the PowerPoint to anyone that's interested. So underneath it are the links where you could get it, and I don't intend you to read it. I just wanted to show you what that looks like, what the court document looks like. What these two court documents found was that the Health and Human Services did not follow up on making a report to Congress in over 30 years. So they didn't make a report starting in 1986, or actually it took a little time for it to get established. What they also found out was the second case against the National Institute of Health is that the task force that the National Institute of Health was supposed to set up wasn't set up. As part of what Janine, Melissa, other parent activists feel is not only do we want to be aware of mandates that are coming down and that could affect whether our children go to school, whether they even get jobs in health fields, whatever it be. We also want there to be a vaccine program that is extremely safe. And part of that is just to see how can this program be made safer. This information was not smeared all over the news, and it should be. And the question is, why isn't information like that being shown? Because everyone in here, regardless of where you stand on vaccines, wants a safe vaccine program. And that kind of got into thinking, well, what's the bigger picture? You know, take a step back. What's the bigger picture of where do we get our information about vaccines? What's the agenda overall, let's say in politics? What's the news media's role in this? What's the pharmaceutical industry's role in this? What's the government's role in this? It's always best to look for the money, because usually you find a lot of answers when you follow the money. So that kind of led to, well, okay, where does the pharmaceutical industry stand in terms of lobby funds in the United States? And it turns out that pharmaceutical companies are the #1 lobby in the United States. The #2 lobby, as of 2018 statistics, is technology. And the pharmaceutical company almost doubled what technology contributed. So this is a very sizable amount of money. I mean, I guess the pharmaceutical industry, you could say, is one of the biggest industry in the United States. The way that carries out when seeing this vaccine program, I kind of followed this pathway. So if drug companies make vaccines, they make money from making vaccines. When I say here that the vaccine program makes the government money, well, the CDC, in case you didn't know, the Center for Disease Control, owns over 50 patents of vaccines. So they make money from that too. The FDA has a huge increase in their budget in 2017, and that huge increase comes from this pharmaceutical industry, from user fees. So if the pharmaceutical companies are happy, you know that the FDA is going to be happy with that as well. The news, what we see in the press, not every country is like this. We sell ads. So who has a lot of money to buy those ads? We know that the pharmaceutical industry definitely has a lot of money to buy ads. Politicians, they take donations. And the doctors, and this is the part I feel also we have to be advocating for them, because if you have candid conversations with doctors, they will tell you that they feel pressured in their industry. There is a medical hierarchy to this. There's pressure by health insurance companies to have fully vaccinated patients, and know that a doctor's #1 concern always should be do no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. If a doctor feels like their industry is putting pressure on them, their medical hierarchy is putting pressure on them, it is, as any other parent, we should be saying to our doctors, we support you. What can we do to help, change that paradigm? So they also do receive kickbacks for vaccinations. And then we kind of are at this point where the state mandates vaccinations, and this is happening for school and this is happening for jobs. It cannot be forced, but the way that it's creeping in is really coercion. So it's saying if these HPV, if Gardasil gets mandated or flu shots get mandated, and if you don't like it, then you have to homeschool. Or if you want to be a nurse or a doctor or you want to work in a healthcare position and they say you can only stay here unless you get a flu shot, then that means maybe you can't take that job. So it's not forcing, but it is coercing you. And that's what's causing parents, a lot of parents, to have red flags. And this uneasy feeling is, what can we, I mean, is this okay? Should we be okay with these mandates?
State mandates being vaccinations for jobs in school. So that's where I'm picking up from, because ultimately where that leads next is ultimately the choice for our children of being school or no school. And your entryway to school is strictly to follow these mandates. No school would mean, if you don't, your only other option, as of now, after June 13th, being that they removed any chance of any exemptions at the moment, that's your only choice as a parent. And I think that's where a lot of us are becoming concerned as parents, is because, especially financially on Long Island, a lot of parents are not set up to be able to say, hey, no problem, I'll just make that choice and I'll just keep my kid home. Realistically, you're being forced to homeschool your child, or give them, in this particular case being the approaching flu shot and HPV mandates. And why those two are so controversial, and I'm going to go through the bills first, is the word, as we see, is mandatory. Mandatory meaning, and I think what a lot of people are caught up with, is the fact that this means no school. It's the first time in New York history that you're facing this unprecedented incident to have to make that choice as a parent. And so S2276 is the first bill I'm going to talk about. And if you see, each bill has an S and an A. The S is your Senate bill, and then it's followed up by an Assembly bill. The name next to each number is the sponsors of those bills. So Senator Hoylman on S226 and Assemblyman Dinowitz there. So speaking on the lines of flu shot mandatory to attend school, most parents feel at this point the state should not interfere with a parent's right to this healthcare decision for children, especially for a product typically that many people feel is ineffective. Yes, the flu shot's available everywhere. It's been available everywhere, right? Supermarkets, CVS, Rite Aid. I mean, there's signs at every turn. But statistically, most people opt out of the flu shot because we often hear the same thing every year, that it's ineffective. So a lot of parents don't feel comfortable that my kid has never had to get a flu shot, or I've never taken a flu shot. It's these two shots in general that are really drawing red flags, making people want to be able to have that choice. Again, this is being about medical choice, our rights to bodily autonomy, in not having to. This is where many are drawing the line. And so with S2276 and A2316, there is some confusion that we haven't really been able to even confirm, because the bill states that it's flu shots mandatory to attend daycare. But in the, if you read the full, and you can go to the Senate website, the Assembly websites to see the full description of these bills. But there's some confusion because they do define in their terms where this could go up to 12th grade. And we can't really get clarification because the name of the bill says daycare, but the description kind of speculates that they could technically maybe mandate this yearly all the way through 12th grade. So you can always contact, again, the bill authors. We all have, but we haven't got definitive answers. For now, though, the bill does state daycare, but that could evolve. The next bill that you see on the right is S298B, sponsored by Senator Hoylman and Assemblyman Powell in there. That's for the Gardasil mandatory to attend school, and that seems to be what's drawing the most attention for everyone. And the reason for that, it seems, is that this is a vaccine that's mandated for the first time for a non-communicable disease. It cannot be spread in a school setting. It's a sexually transmitted disease. And so that, again, is why so many people are up in arms. And we're going to talk a bit more about why. That has to do with the side effects and the fast tracking before I get ahead of myself. But that's a main concern as well, because again, this is mandatory to attend school, although it's not communicable in a school setting. It doesn't make much sense. And so what a lot of parents, myself included, is we feel this is sort of a backdoor approach to increase the sales, basically. And Emily had spoke about the 4 pharmaceutical agencies that manufacture vaccines. This one is made by Merck. And Merck actually is connected to what a lot of people have read in the news is Vioxx, which caused over 60,000 deaths. But the difference is you can, sue the manufacturer. There's been billions of dollars, is it millions or billions? Lots of payouts for those injuries. And so there's a concern, that Merck was irresponsible with that drug, and now they happen to be the drug that is the manufacturer to make this Gardasil to mandate for our children through fast tracking. So that's a concern with S298B. And next is, it's sort of one that's not being talked about as much, is S3899, and that is by Senator Kruger and Assemblywoman Palin again there. So this allows minors, it says here, it's actually a typo, to be given STD vaccines without parental knowledge or consent. But the true definition of that bill is to allow minors to be treated for sexually transmitted diseases without parental consent. And so why we're saying that this is more of a concern is because everyone's so focused on Gardasil. This bill doesn't particularly say Gardasil in the name, but treatment of the STD can include things that are evolving, not only just with Gardasil, but there's also now a preventative HIV pill that has to be taken daily. And so that would also get thrown into this bill, should it pass. Parents will not, you will not need to know or grant consent for your child to get these kinds of treatments. And something that living on Long Island, we are not fully aware of, I'm newly aware to this, is that there's actually New York City in-school clinics that are already offering these types of treatments to their students. And so a major concern for Long Islanders is, let's say this gets to passing, not only do we have to worry about not granting our consent, but there is assumption, will these clinics now spread into the Long Island sector? Will our children be going to school, and instead of going to school nurse for an ice pack, now all of a sudden they can get preventative measures for the HIV pill or the Gardasil shot? Which Janine will be talking about the side effects and the dangers in that of your child receiving these sorts of things in a school setting. And then the other one is S4244, which allows minors 14 years to obtain any vaccine at all required to attend school. They will be able to get that without your parental consent as well. So, to think about that, the major concerns with this bill is it's absurd to assume that a child of any age knows enough about their own medical history. I mean, think about it. That your 14-year-old, we're lucky if they, know to stuff their binder with the right materials even by that age, and they're supposed to go and advocate for themselves to, to grant permission. And what we also are concerned about is that, there's large payouts for this vaccine, and so what level of coercion is there going to be to, teach these kids? There's evolving sex education measures going throughout the schools, as we know. So there's sort of what messages are they going to be receiving to really make true informed consent? They look up to their teachers, they look up to their principals, maybe they look up to the school nurse at that point, if and when she's able to give this. So these are major concerns for parents, and that's what's making these bills draw so much attention to communities. This is, again, it's drawing a line in the sand where parents are saying, we're not really willing to do this. We do get to advocate for our children. And even again, if you give your child vaccines, what is the reason in allowing them to obtain them without your permission. So also a person giving the shot, they may have financial incentive to do so. And I'm trying to see what else I missed here. It conflicts with federal law. That was the last thing I wanted to point out. The National Childhood Vaccine Act requires that a vaccine information statement be given to minors' parents prior to vaccination. And so again, this is going to be a missed opportunity for parents to be able to say, hey, I don't want my child to have this. Something can happen to your child while they're in school, and it's just a major risk that I think most parents are just not willing to take at this point. So in summary, the main concern is again about these bills. It's not only because they interfere with our ability to make a choice, but at the end of the day, it's also because of the choice that they're aiming to mandate us to make as parents. So moving into the general Gardasil stats, a lot of concern is that the HPV vaccine, it was never tested for safety against a placebo. Does everyone here know what a placebo is or more? So I should ask, anyone not know what a placebo is? So basically what that means is there's no true studies to prove the dangers of the vaccine because it wasn't inert placebo or gold standard tested the way medications typically are. And then in the trials, they found serious vaccine reactions, 1 in every 500 girls. And now this mentions girls, but to be clear, this vaccine is going to now be offered to boys and girls. It was originally intended only for girls, and then they figured they can mass market it a little bit more. Instead of it being geared towards HPV causing cervical cancer, they then switched it to being that males can now carry HPV, which can, then turn into cervical cancer in women. So they, treated the boys now as carriers and opened up the market to boys and girls. And so also in the only up until 2018, these are actually old stats, but there were 55,000 serious vaccine reactions reported. It's now well over 65,000. And also fewer than 1% of the serious vaccine reactions were ever even reported. So the way we look at it is, on average, there's VAERS. Emily had mentioned the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act. There is a court where you can report injuries, but what this is stating is fewer than 1% ever make it that far. So any of these stats that we're looking at, we often ask parents to question themselves, what do those numbers look like if 100% were reported? And last, 10% were in the ER within 42 days of the vaccine. And again, this still got put through. And 400 deaths following the vaccine, that's now gone well over 500 because these stats were from 2018. What's more interesting and why this has become so controversial is this is a Nobel Prize winner for the HIV virus, Luc Montagnier. And I'm just going to read his quote. "The side effects are underreported by medical personnel, while there are a growing number of parents suing manufacturers and governments for inducing lifelong handicaps, even death, of their loved ones. In fact, this is a tragic example of various segments of our society worldwide, placing economic interests before the health and protection of our younger generation." So this is someone who specialized in the HIV virus, even speaking out against this vaccine. A lot of people, specialists, even what I'm going to introduce to you next is Dr. Diane Harper. She's actually a human papillomavirus expert, and actually the creator of the vaccine. She helped to create Gardasil. She actually came forward and said that Gardasil is more dangerous than the HPV virus that it was made to prevent. And so that's super alarming as well. Again, why this is raising so many red flags is because you have someone, including a maker of the vaccine, stepping forward. And so being a renowned HPV specialist, this is what she had to say. Gardasil data showed that in the last 5 years, there is no data showing that it remains effective beyond 5 years. So now to mandate this to get into school, what that looks like is, say they start this at 14. It's only going to last for 5 years, if it even does what it says it does. So what happens beyond that? And it's a 3-series shot within 6 months' time. So there's not even evidence that it is effective beyond that. Also, the benefit to public health is nothing. There's no reduction in cervical cancers. They're just postponed. So what that's saying is, the benefit of prevention isn't even there. And again, this coming, remind yourself as I read these, from a specialist who helped create the vaccine and is renowned in the HPV world. Serious side effects had been reported after Gardasil use that could prove riskier than the cervical cancer it claimed to prevent. And if we vaccinate 11-year-olds and the protection doesn't last, Dr. Diane Harper felt that we've actually put them at harm from the side effects. So we're putting our kids at more risk versus even helping them with what we thought we would be giving them the shot for. And then last, cervical cancer, it's usually entirely curable when detected. Pap smears are still the best way, and we still have this available. And that's what makes this so much more at risk for our kids too, is they're acting as if this is the cure-all. Not only does it not prove effective, but we still have methods in place that are more effective and safer, and for whatever reason, it's like they're turning a blind eye to that. And so next, what's really, really alarming, I find this one most alarming, is that the American College of Pediatrics even issued their warning. That's not very typical. So think about it. This is being offered to our children, mandated for them to go to school, and we have the American College of Pediatrics speaking out about it. What they had to say here, the overwhelming majority of 76% of theirs, that was the reporting agency that I mentioned, since 2006, the most common reports were ovarian failure, premature menopause, menopause in children as young as 12 years old. So imagine your 12-year-old daughter being forced into menopause from one series of Gardasil here. And also amenorrhea, if you don't know what that is, that's the absence of your period, so your child not getting their period, and that it's associated solely with Gardasil. So the American College of Pediatrics actually said these are related specifically to that. Next, they also said that the pre-licensure safety studies for Gardasil, what I mentioned before is they used a placebo that contained polysorbate 80, as well as aluminum, and Janine's going to be speaking, stay with us for that in more specifically. But basically what this is saying, they didn't use the inert placebo, which would typically be a saline. They used polysorbate 80 and aluminum. And what that did is it said such ingredients could cause ovarian dysfunction. An increase in amenorrhea probably would not have been detected in the placebo of the controlled trial. So they kind of tricked the stats to say that this was doing what it actually did not do. So it's very sneaky, basically, what they did, not doing an inert placebo study. And then also a casual relationship between the human papillomavirus, if not Gardasil specific, and ovarian dysfunction cannot be ruled out at this time. So again, the American Academy of Pediatrics, those are the alarming stats that they had to tell parents. We don't need you to read this slide. This is just an example of just how many studies are out there from doctors, from professionals, from experts, scientists. We could give you all these links if you would like. There's actually pages and pages of this. We just wanted this as a visual to show you that there's very alarming information out there, and for whatever reason, we feel as parents it's being ignored by legislators and by the manufacturers. And the biggest concern with Gardasil is death. 550 deaths so far. It says here, our studies suggest that the HPV vaccines containing HPV 16L1 antigens, they pose an inherent risk for triggering potentially fatal autoimmune vasculopathies. Doesn't sound very fun, if you ask me. So death being the #1 concern. This might be, just somewhat of a trigger warning. There actually have been 550 deaths, as I said, and these are some of the children that have already died. This is Christina Tarcell. She was only 21 years old. She passed away 3 days after receiving Gardasil while in her college dorm room. And she actually won her federal vaccine court case. So the federal vaccine court actually ruled that Gardasil did indeed kill Christina. This is Christopher Brunch. He died August 14th of 2018. His parents are huge advocates right now, trying to spread awareness for the risk of this vaccine. Sorry, but he was also Gardasil was not only affecting girls. Why we want to point this out is, again, it was transferred over to being mandated for boys as well, or offered to boys, despite the fact that boys are not at risk for cervical cancer, because boys do not have a cervix. So that getting into, again, the reason they did that is they decided to say we can market boys by translating this to being carriers. Even though, again, 90% of HPV cases heal on their own. And then last, this is Colton Barrett. He was one of the more active of the bunch. He was extremely athletic. He rode on motorbikes. He was only 13 years old. After receiving his HPV vaccine, he went completely paralyzed. On January 5th, he actually took his own life because of the debilitating effects of the shot. That's his mom next to him. And just a really tragic story. He lost everything. He couldn't, go to school any longer. This is a child who used to be heavily involved in sports and motocross, and unfortunately, he was a victim to Gardasil. We're not going to play this. It's just something that we recommend if you want to take a look at more of these types of teenager stories and other children. There's a trailer available on YouTube. It's kind of tricky to find because there's a lot of censorship happening in the online world around vaccines in general, but particularly Gardasil. Google has entered the vaccine world, as has Facebook. So this is something, though, that you might want to check out. It's called Sacrificial Virgins. It's about 30 minutes long, but it goes through case after case of children that have been lost to Gardasil, and they are all real cases. And again, including someone like Christina, who actually, the vaccine court actually flat out stated her death was from Gardasil. This is a current case going on. Robbie versus Merck. This has not been closed out yet, but the reason we wanted you to see this as well, these mandates are happening while these cases are still happening. So it's like we're not even allowed to wait to see. We already know that there's confirmed deaths from the Gardasil vaccine. This is a major case. The plaintiff, Jennifer Robbie, she's suing Merck for fraud and other acts in regards to the approval of marketing the vaccine. And these are the allegations that are made in the case. 2.3% experienced serious autoimmune disease within 7 months of receiving Gardasil. Death rates 2 times greater than the background rates. 5 times greater numbers of birth defects among pregnant trial participants, and 10 times greater numbers of reproductive issues. There's a lot of cases where they're finding that Gardasil causes infertility. Certain clinical trial groups also receiving Gardasil, they were giving up to 45% more likely to develop the precancerous cervical lesions or cancer compared to the unvaccinated girls. So here you are, you're getting vaccinated for prevention of cervical cancer, but they were actually found to be 45% more likely to develop the cancer, the precancerous lesions. And so she further alleges that Merck knew all of this and deliberately covered it up. Just as years before, again, as I mentioned, Merck had covered up knowledge that Vioxx was dangerous, and we all know how that turned out. I mean, it's been in the papers recently. So again, this case is going on right now, and while this is going on, we're supposed to give this to our children without any confirmation, without knowing where this is headed. Basically our children will be denied school if we don't question this, or rather question this, but have to be forced to do it anyway. And so Janine's going to come up now, and that's just a book, Vaccine on Trial. We'll go over that a little bit more at the end. There's lots of cases there, but she's going to now get into the science of Gardasil.
Okay, so I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes of the Gardasil vaccine as well as the flu vaccine. Before I do that, I just want to go back and say two things that we didn't talk about. The Gardasil vaccine for the three-shot series, Merck makes $450 on every one of those series. So when we talked about following the money and seeing what's going on and why this push is happening, just do some math in your head, okay? We're going to mandate these for children starting at 9 years old, times $450 per 3 series. It's one of the most expensive vaccines out there. Second is that this vaccine was fast-tracked. It was pushed through quicker than any other vaccine. You heard us talk about safety testing and how this is a biologic and not a drug. The fact that it was fast-tracked, and there's this unbelievable clip that shows you how it goes through the process. Normally it would take 2 to 3 years. This was put through in months. So to me, that's a red flag in and of itself, okay? So we're going to start talking about some of the ingredients. So when we say, have you asked your doctor about what aluminum is safe to inject or how much is safe to inject? The real answer is that no amount of aluminum is safe in your bodies. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So you have to really understand that Gardasil 9 has more than double the amount of aluminum than Gardasil. The original Gardasil that came out first had 250 micrograms. Gardasil 9 has 500 micrograms of aluminum. There is a standard that the FDA will speak to, and they'll say 25 micrograms is quote unquote safe. 25. We are now at 500. 500. When I always ask people, this is something I talk about, I'm also a nutritionist, so I talk a lot about food and health and how to stay healthy. I ask people, do you read the ingredients in vaccinations, in your food, excuse me. Everybody's turning over the labels and saying, oh, we can't have gluten. Oh, we can't have dairy. Are you asking your doctors what ingredients are in these vaccines? And if you're not, you need to be. And one of the most important things you could absolutely do is ask for a package insert. Because it's blatantly there. These are all of the information I'm going to show you right now are from package inserts. We didn't make this up. We researched it just the same exact way that you all are able to research it. So the next slide is very interesting. I spoke to the amount of aluminum in Gardasil. However, you're going to see all the other vaccines here. I know we're only speaking to Gardasil, but it's important to understand that Gardasil 9, so you can see Gardasil above it was 225. I misquoted, I said 250. But Gardasil 9 is now 500 micrograms. And as you'll see, just looking, that all of the vaccines listed here have high doses of aluminum. Let's talk about what these ingredients do and why they're dangerous. These are concerning ingredients in Gardasil. Aluminum is a known neurotoxin. It can cross the blood-brain barrier. Does everyone understand that things aren't supposed to cross the blood-brain barrier? That's why you have a blood-brain barrier. It's to protect your brain. So when there's drugs that are being injected subcutaneously into your body, these toxins push that drug into the brain. So it damages the central nervous system along with a whole host of other things that we're going to get into. Sodium borate is yet another ingredient, and it's known as borax. And there are 35 micrograms in that. As you can see, this is used to kill cockroaches and is listed as a dangerous poison. So the symptoms of sodium borate poisoning are very similar to the adverse reactions that we're seeing and hearing and studying when children are receiving these Gardasil shots. So to me, that's also eye-opening because we're watching reactions happening, and then it's the same reactions that are happening that can be caused by sodium borate that is listed as a poison. It's also linked to infertility. And I also want to stress that people will often say, well, there's aluminum in food, and there could be aluminum in spinach, and there's aluminum in potatoes. It's a completely different kind of aluminum. And please, please, please hear me when I tell you that there's a huge difference between ingestion and injection, okay? When you inject, it bypasses all your organs. The whole point of ingestion is that it goes through your organs, your kidney does its job, your liver does its job, and then whatever's toxic is passed out. That doesn't happen when things are injected. And that therein lies the problem where things are able to cross the blood-brain barrier. Let's talk about polysorbate 80 because this is a dirty, dirty little secret that an ingredient that should never ever be used. And we're hearing more and more about it. And again, it's because we did our homework and studied the package inserts. Polysorbate 80 is, as we talked about, can cross the blood-brain barrier, but what it also is a chemical emulsifier. It suppresses the immune system. It can cause, out of several things, I'll give you 3, anaphylactic shock, encephalitis, and infertility. So does everyone know what encephalitis is? Okay, so in the brain, it doesn't always mean that's brain swelling, but it means there's some kind of serious damage that can occur to the brain. What's also interesting about polysorbate 80 is this chemical alone has not been proven to be safe to be injected into humans. But yet here we are injecting it into humans. The next thing I'm going to show you, this is an actual package insert. I beg and I pray of every single person who's on the fence with these types of, I don't care what the vaccination is, ask your doctor for a package insert. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I mean, we're going to stick to 2 here, but if you're going to do your due diligence about what goes into your body, then you need to understand the ingredients. So I'm not going to read this to death here, but you can see that it talks about this is directly from the insert, speaking to approximately 500 micrograms of aluminum are in a 0.5 milliliter dose, okay? You see the polysorbate 80 that I just discussed. Here's where it gets interesting. On 13.1, Gardasil 9 has never been evaluated for potential to cause carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, or impairment of male fertility. So if anyone is questioning what carcinogenicity is, it's the ability to cause tumors. So this drug and this vaccination has never been proven to not cause tumors. So we don't know if it does. Okay, so, and then the genetic information for genotoxicity is the fact that it can cause cells to mutate. So that's what that saying is. And to me, the most important part here is that it has never been proven to not impair male fertility. So we have no idea if this is causing fertility in men or boys. What we do know, and we'll talk about it, is that it is causing ovarian failure in girls and women. Just another part of the HPV vaccine insert. Because vaccinees, which would be the child being vaccinated, may develop syncope, sometimes resulting in falling with injury, observation for 15 minutes after administration is recommended. So your doctor is supposed to give the child the vaccination and then sit there for 15 minutes to make sure. Syncope is fainting. And the Trundleberg position is when, speak to the Trundleberg position means the body is laid flat because you have fainted. They are actually supposed to monitor any child that gets this shot for 15 minutes or longer to make sure they don't faint. I don't, call me crazy, but I don't want to shoot something into my child that is going to cause them to pass out and that a doctor has to monitor them for 15 minutes to make sure they're still standing.
Putting him in a shock position.
What'd you say?
They're treating him for shock in the Trendelenburg position. It's exactly what Trendelenburg is.
Okay.
Legs elevated, treating them for shock.
Treating them for shock is what he's saying.
It's going to put them in shock.
I personally find this quite disturbing. This is post-marketing experience. In the very first line, or somewhere thereabouts, it says, Gardasil 9 was never safety tested against a true inert placebo. It is there for you all to read. Melissa brought it up, Emily spoke to it. It's there for you to see that it was never tested the way it should have been tested. The following adverse experiences have been spontaneously reported during post-approval use of Gardasil and may also be seen in post-marketing experience with Gardasil 9. Mediastinal or tumors, thank you to people looking that up for us.
Cancerous tumors.
No, it's not good. I mean, notice how it goes through just different systems in the body. So we have blood and lymphatic system, respiratory, gastrointestinal, general disorders, immune system disorders. Is everyone here familiar with autoimmune disease and what they are and how broad they are? Once you get an autoimmune disease, it doesn't go away overnight. It takes years or months or weeks to try to undo, or never. I hate to say never because I like to think, there's an answer to something. But it takes a very long time. From one injection or 2 or 3, you can then put any child at risk for a permanent, lifelong autoimmune disease. On and on. You guys, I would encourage you to take a picture. Again, these are in the package inserts. It's hard to read. It really is hard to read. Oh, I'm sorry, and I missed something very important. this little word right here that's buried in here, the word death. The word death is listed as an adverse reaction on a Gardasil package. I call me crazy. You can go to vaccine.guide, and every insert for every vaccine is listed there. Okay. So that really speaks to Gardasil. We'll open it up for some questions at the end. I want to make sure we get to what else is happening, which is next to be mandated, is the flu shot. The flu shot in and of itself, as of right now, is responsible for the most serious adverse reactions reported every year. So this study out of the world-famous Mayo Clinic reports that children who have received the flu vaccine had 3 times the risk of hospitalization and compared to children who had not received the vaccine. So numerous side effects, including respiratory issues, paralysis, and death. From 2014 to 2015, the NVICP, the flu shot settlements, this money that was paid out for problems with the flu shot increased from 4.9 million to where it started to 61 million. 1,100% increase. According to the CDC, over the past 14 seasons, the effectiveness of the influenza vaccine has varied from 10 to 60%. 60% is generous. I don't know how many people here, feel that the flu vaccine works. Every time you get the flu vaccine, with the following year, you have weakened your ability to fight that flu. So please keep that in mind. The effectiveness of this shot is nil. So you're going to see what you're putting into your body. I will tell you, people, again, as a nutritionist and a mom and a person who believes in health, it's not so bad to get the flu. If you handle yourself right and you treat your body the way you're supposed to treat your body and do all the things that we know to do, you will never need this shot. You will never need this shot. So here's something right from the insert again. Specific levels of antibody titers post-vaccination. Post-vaccination with inactivated influenza vaccine have not been correlated with protection from the influenza virus. Have not been correlated. They are saying in the insert that there is no proof that the flu vaccine helps you to not get the flu. Does that make sense? Yes. Right there for all you guys to read. Simply put, here we are saying it has not proven to be effective. Crazy, right? It's okay. This is also part of the insert. Immune mechanisms conferring protection against influenza following receipt of the flu mist. There's several different types of flu vaccines. This one right now is an insert from the flu mist, which is the spray. They are not fully understood. Serum antibodies, mucosal antibodies, and influenza-specific T cells may play a role. Again, here, this is fluvirin. Multi-dose flu shot is the only one in the U.S. that contains mercury. I'm going to have the same conversation here that I said about aluminum. There really is not a safe amount of mercury that should be injected into your body, okay? You can have some mercury in fish, we get it. I'm going to say it one last time. Injection is very different than ingestion. The actual insert, the pre-filled syringe, has trace amounts of mercury. The multi-dose vial has 25 micrograms. We know that no amount is safe in the body. I'm going to keep repeating myself. So here is post-marketing experience. I don't even know where to start with this, because when I see something that lists every possible body system that known to mankind as an adverse reaction or a problem, it's alarming. You have immune system disorders, you have cardiovascular disorders, you have digestive disorders, blood and lymphatic disorders, metabolic and nutritional disorders, musculoskeletal, nervous system disorders, and these are the ones actually that are a little more common because people think it's normal. We start to normalize when things happen to us. Oh, I got a little headache, I'm a little dizzy, I'm confused, I have some febrile convulsions. Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, is not normal. So people will get it and they don't realize that they're getting it from the actual vaccine. Transverse myelitis, neuropathy, on and on it goes. That's just under one body system. We get to respiratory disorders. We get to skin and appendages, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, that's nasty, sweating, general disorders, and administration site conditions, right? Obviously, injection site cellulitis-like reactions. Post-marketing experience for a vaccine that's been around for a very long time, that to me seems like a hell of a lot of problems to get from one shot. If anyone here has a doctor who's telling you this, I'd love for you to come talk to me, because I'd love to know what doctor is actually giving their patients this information, because every single person in this room and every single person everywhere needs to know this. More insert material, neurological disorders temporarily associated with influenza vaccination, such as encephalopathy, optic neuritis neuropathy, partial facial paralysis, and brachial plexus neuropathy have been reported. Cannot tell you how many people I've met who have gotten Bell's palsy after getting the flu vaccine, where the whole side of their face is completely incapacitated. Some I know, young people younger than me. Some I know who it's gone away, and some that to this day, one side of their face is completely paralyzed. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what this word is. Does anyone here know what shedding is? Other than my regular, yeah. Hi, Jackie. So this is what shedding is, because we're only sticking to these two vaccines, so we'll just speak to this. Shedding is when you are actually injected or put something up your nose that has been made with a live virus. If that virus is alive, that means you are now a contagion, and you are going to shed onto me, because you now have a live virus that was either injected or shot up your nose. So shedding, and I just want to put this out there, there are several other vaccines that do shed. So please be aware of what that is. It's a very important term. It's also another term that doctors don't want you to, they should warn you. If your child gets the MMR, they should tell you that your child was just injected with a live virus and that they are now able to shed. And I'll leave it at that.
Just note, if you get the MMR, because it's the measles portion of it that's the live part, and you're sick, so if you start to cough, you really should stay home. And if you ask a doctor about that, they will tell you that too, that if you're sick following the MMR vaccine, because the measles part of it is the live virus part, you really shouldn't go out if you have a cough, because that you are still in that 6-week shedding area. Sometimes you can actually shed it without symptoms. The only other one, varicella, is the same thing. And the polio vaccine, we don't give it in this country, but it is a live virus vaccine that's given elsewhere in other parts of the world. There's an issue with that, but you're typically shed there through fecal matter. But it's the measles portion. Be aware that if your child has symptoms for that 6-week period, you really should keep them, away from immunocompromised people.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Suzanne Humphreys is a medical doctor, and she's also a nephrologist. She's unbelievable. I would encourage any of you here to follow her. She's on YouTube. You can Google her. Here's one of the things that she says about the flu shot toll on the immune system. And I had referenced this slightly earlier. If you've taken an influenza vaccine on day 1, your risk of contracting influenza in year 2 is higher, and your risk of getting a pandemic strain is higher. Your risk of shedding and spreading the virus for longer periods of time is higher as a result of what the vaccine did to your immune system the year before. So clearly, every time you take this vaccine, there's some long-lasting effects that may not be in your favor. And basically, knowing that it's not effective, knowing that it doesn't work, to me, is a giant risk. I'm going to talk about this, because the risk to benefit ratio. What you often hear when you go to a doctor, and if you dare say that you are concerned about a certain vaccination, I don't care what it is, they say, well, we measure the risk to benefit ratio, and we feel like the benefit of this vaccine outweighs the risk. Does everything I just showed you does that even make sense? It's the opposite. The risks outweigh the benefit. And that's why we're standing here, because everyone has to understand how dangerous these risks are. Gardasil children are dying. Flu is not even effective and does some serious damage to people, especially the elderly and especially immunocompromised people. So whenever the medical model is to talk about the risk to benefit ratio, challenge that risk to benefit ratio.
The U.S. Supreme Court did declare that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, meaning that it was important to continue with the vaccine program, but they declared that there are unsafe aspects to the vaccine program. And also, up at the top, only 1% of vaccine reactions are reported. And the issue with that is that means that there's a lot of adverse reactions that are happening that you're not necessarily connecting the dots. So vaccine injury is not necessarily being reported as vaccine injury. And this was a study done by Harvard. that spoke about only 1% of vaccine injuries being reported. So what do you do now? There's several things that you can do. I would say the primary thing we're saying to do is to ask your doctor for the vaccine inserts, for you to read it, to see how you feel comfortable with it. But most importantly, contact your local senators and assembly people if you feel that you want the right to make that decision and still allow your child to go to school. We have a moment now to do this for Gardasil and for the flu, and for specifically any the other bills that spoke to giving any type of medication for STDs without your parental consent, or the bill about having your 14-year-old being able to make that decision. And we have someone that would like to, that's going to share her history with the Gardasil vaccine.
So my goal tonight is to tell you guys my experience with both Gardasil and the flu vaccine, in hopes that you and people that you know and love don't ever have to go through something like I went through, because these are the things that they don't tell you. They didn't tell me. So back in March of 2007, I was 26 years old, and I received the first shot in the Gardasil series. And my doctor did tell me about the syncope, that I could pass out, and I had to stay there for 15 minutes, but it was no big deal, and perfectly safe. There was no other mention of any other possible side effects or anything else that could go wrong. So I rolled up my sleeve, and I said, sure, you're the doc, you know what you're talking about, and guess what? They didn't. So that was the first shot, and it changed my life, and I had no idea. In May of 2007, I received the second shot. After the first shot, I was exhausted. I had this achiness, this tiredness that just would not leave. I was depressed, and I had unrelenting headaches that just persisted. Of course, I never made the connection because nobody told me. Why would I know this stuff? After the second shot, I had numbness and tingling in my toes. I had an achiness in my arms. It made them so heavy, sometimes I couldn't even lift a pen. September of that year, I received the third shot, and the achiness got worse. It was like flu aches all over my body, but so much worse. Searing pains in the fleshy part of my palm, right underneath my thumb, that they told me was carpal tunnel. It wasn't. Muscle and joint pain that came and went. Sometimes my hip joint would just get stuck and boop, fall down. But nobody could tell me why. And 6 weeks after the last Gardasil shot, I received the first and only flu shot I ever had in my life. I don't know why I did it, but they said, let's do it, you're here. And well, nobody bothered to tell me otherwise, so I did it. After that, I was basically non-functioning. My doctors sent me to neurologists, neuro-ophthalmologists, rheumatologists, pain management doctors eventually, because they couldn't figure out how to help me. I was on more medications than I could count, and none of them helped. Invasive test after test, multiple nerve conduction studies, EMGs, MRIs. I was like a human pincushion as far as all the blood work, and I never got any answers. I only got progressively worse. All the tests would come back negative. Everything was clean, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And many times I heard, it's in your head, it's not really happening. It was happening. The MRIs showed one lesion, and then eventually a second lesion, but I was told it had nothing to do with what was happening to me. And now, fast forward, it's about 13 years later, I finally have some answers. So those answers are, fibromyalgia, small fiber neuropathy, rheumatoid arthritis. There are markers for muscle deterioration that they haven't figured out why yet, but it's indicative of crossover disease or some sort of connective tissue disease going on. And I found out all that information myself. My doctors didn't help me. I had to do the work. I had to come up with the information. I had to bring it to them. And now I finally have some answers and I know how to treat going forward. I found other doctors that were able to help me get to a place where I can actually stand here in front of you today and have a quasi-intelligent conversation about it. And it's a fine line that I walk every day. Any little mistake I make in my daily food intake, my behaviors, my activity level, my sleep allotment, any of that can set me back tremendously. And basically, I was poisoned. I was poisoned by the heavy metals and all the other ingredients in the vaccines. There's really no other way to put it. So I was 26 years old when that happened. I'm almost 40. Don't tell anyone that we're being recorded. Okay. So 26 years old. Imagine your kid getting something like this and you don't know about it. How would you know what's going on to them? I didn't know what was going on with me. You would have no idea. If this Kruger bill passes, the 3899, I mean, there's so much wrong with all of them. But just imagine that could happen to your kid and you would have no idea what you're looking at. You would have no idea what's going on and you would have no clue. Like me, I didn't know. There's nothing left for me to do about it. I can't sue them. The time has far surpassed for me to be able to even report my injuries to VAERS, even with doctor verification of what I have going on. The only thing I can do is talk about it, is scream about it from the rooftops, because all I can do is warn people. That's all I have left to be able to make any of this worth it. So please listen to what I'm saying. Read the pamphlets that were handed out. It's got the full story there of what I went through. It's not that long, but there are links. If you want to share the story with other people, there's links there. My email is there if you have any questions that you want to ask or you know anyone who's going through the same thing. With everything that I went through and that I'm still going through, as angry as I am, I can tell you that I am more so grateful. I'm supremely grateful for all of the knowledge that I have now, because I can stand in front of you and say that it will never be my child. And now, because I'm standing here telling you, and I hope you're listening and you read it and you look into it, hopefully it won't ever be yours. So thank you for coming.
In closing, I just want to stress a few things of what to do now that we didn't really get to focus on as closely. As we mentioned, we started a group, HPV and Flu Shot Awareness, New York. Make sure you put the NY at the end if you're not following us on Facebook already. You could stay up to date specifically for these bills. And what we need to make happen, we need numbers for this. And so we need people contacting legislators, and we help you do that. I will tell you, I knew nothing about politics until all of this started happening. My life was completely changed this year, and Rita Palma is the main guru, I like to call her, that I follow for those instructions. So the group is not just informational about the vaccines, but specific action steps that you could take. We give you the phone numbers, we give you the emails, we give you the alerts, we tell you exactly what you can do to take action to help us grow in numbers so that the legislators hear us. And the most important thing, which might sound a little outrageous, that I'm going to invite you to, is it's this important, is to show up in Albany. If you never have before, which I never again did until this year, Rita's been doing this for years, other people have as well. We have almost over, I think it is this week, 18,000 people in the group from all over New York State. And so what's going to happen January 8th, that week, is the legislative session where these bills are going to be proposed. They're going to go to vote sometime that week or thereafter. And so what's happening on January 8th is we are gathering in Albany. They need to see us. They need to know that this is a problem. It can't happen from behind the computer. I have taken trips up there now, as well as Janine, Emily, and other people in this room. And so it's just something, please, to think about. I just want to plant that seed that this is that serious. I hope you realize that tonight. That is our message, is we have to come together as a community. And the beautiful thing about that group is we don't care what your stance is on vaccines. We've brought people together from all sides of the equation. The commonality that we have is we have to kill these bills. We have to kill these bills or our kids, everyone's kids are going to be kicked out of school. A lot of children are going to be harmed. We know what the side effects are now, and that's what's really at risk. So people sitting home isn't going to be enough. Phone calls aren't going to be enough. Emails, unfortunately, this day and age, they're just not enough. They're read most likely by assistants who barely look at them. So just please consider to join us in Albany. The details will be in the group of what's happening specifically that day. And then there's some more generic people that you could follow as well, experts sort of in the arena of the law. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. of the Children Health Defense. Also, some of the pamphlets that you saw on the slides are from Learn the Risk. That's learntherisk.org. Our email, if you want any information from the slides or a copy of tonight's presentation, is parentcontact@gmail.com. And the main person to follow here on Long Island is Rita Palma. That's Rita Palma. You could follow her on Facebook for other action alerts and information for all of this as well. So that concludes the presentation, and if anyone has any questions, Janine, Emily will come back up along with myself, and hopefully we can get them answered for you.
Are we ready for questions?
Sure.
Yeah. Good.
Do you guys want to come
So
up?
they removed the religious exemption, is that correct?
That's correct.
So at one point, or has it already been kicked up as a constitutional violation to the Supreme Court in Washington? The state can make whatever rule they want, but if you're violating my constitutional rights to protect my family or my right to religious freedom, well, have we gotten to that point yet, or?
No,
I mean,
unfortunately not. I think that's, the main point that we need to make here. If you weren't affected by the religious exemption, you wouldn't know that fight was being fought by a small majority. There were only 26,000 families that exercised their religious religious exemptions. So it's less. It was 0.8% of New York that exercised that right. So in losing that, now that's why we need larger numbers to fight these bills, because they sort of. That's the reason that we're in this mess, is most people don't realize, and why you're here is because if these bills pass, there is no more exemptions. They're gone. And so it's not going to get to the Supreme Court overnight. The answer to your question is no.
But there's been
No.
several lawsuits.
But there's,
Courts in New York.
Well, yeah, obviously.
We're losing everywhere.
We're losing it, right.
Courts are corrupt, and the law is actually kind of
I agree
against us
wholeheartedly
as well.
with you.
and one thing I just want to mention,
Wait a minute.
so in also one thing to add here, again, if you weren't following what was happening with the fight in that exemption, the same week that the religious exemption was removed, and so it didn't affect you if you weren't exercising that right, but here we are, it's going to affect you now, because that was the exemption that existed in New York, and it's gone. That same week, Andrew Cuomo took a check for $48 million the same week that he signed that bill from Merck. And Merck makes Gardasil.
For the betterment of Albany. It was, to be used for Albany.
Merck is going to set up shop or expand their shop in Albany. So that's, just an added note that we feel is related. I don't think it's coincidence. I'm just, in my opinion. So, there's a lot of other things happening behind the scenes if you weren't following
How does the
the
state
exemption.
make a law that violates my federal rights? You're
Yeah,
not
the
supposed to
federal
have a law that
Constitution.
interferes with federal rights.
Right,
It's that simple. You're violating my federal rights.
right.
And that's what we're
I have
fighting
a
back
19-month-old
for.
at home, 9-year-old daughter, and over my dead body will she get this drug.
Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to point something out that I found very concerning. Over the weekend, I was talking to somebody who told me they went to their gynecologist for their annual PAP, and they were told that their medical coverage, the coverage is changing, that they would no longer be able to get a yearly PAP, that it would be every 5 years.
Ugh.
That's what they were getting.
Which is concerning, because Gardasil 9 only covers, there's over, 40 strains.
Yeah.
That's something we didn't mention.
Yeah.
Right, because that's the leading cause of diagnosis. the leading
But now they're trying to minimize
So I thought that was very
Yeah,
concerning.
what's-
It's also very coincidental that it's happening now.
as
So
the
on that note, you're correct. Pap smears, they say, are the most effective. And so a couple of things that are happening there. They're finding that one of the worries is your children without consent are going to get Gardasil. It only covers a very limited amount of strains. There's over 200 strains. It's called Gardasil 9 because it covers 9 strains
Right.
of 200 and something human papillomaviruses. So that's one part. The second part is your child, again, being 14 or whatever, might think, hey, I got the shot. I don't need to worry. Or people start thinking they don't need pap smears anymore. They have this blind trust that they're fully protected by this vaccine when, in essence, you're not. You're, if anything, even if it were true that you were protected against the 9, what are your chances of the other 200 and something? So that is a major concern. I'm glad you brought that up. And now that they are spreading out pap smears, people aren't going to pay for this. We all know what it's like. You're not going to pay for something out of pocket. You're going to wait for that 5-year mark where they're saying yearly pap smears. There's other experts that we didn't show tonight that also are speaking on that behalf, insisting that there is no reason for this because we have pap smears in place. We don't need this. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I just want to say there's over 200 vaccines that are in development. So this one in particular, Gardasil or flu vaccines, it's a trigger for a lot of people who vaccinate because there has not been a lot of safety testings done with Gardasil. But it should be a concern for anyone who vaccinates to lose the ability to say no to a vaccine because maybe 100 vaccines down the line, you don't want that one, you have no more right to say no. And the only way that they're going to listen is by the voters. And if you take your children out of school, that state, they're not going to get money, right? So your school system is not going to get money if you take your children out. If half of the state kept their children home and homeschool, this would change like that because they would lose money. It's the only way you're going to get them to do something is over money and threatening to not give it to the state.
Or voting them out of office.
Right.
They all want to win. If they recognize this as a pivotal issue and whether or not they're going to get their seat back, that will motivate them. That is really it.